Okay, let's do some history, shall we? We're going to start in 1301 with Precolumbian America, sometimes called Pre-Contact America. This would be America before the beginning of the conquest by Europeans just over 500 years ago. So, question first. Well, first of all, the word history. History, properly speaking, is based on written documents, supported, of course, by other things that might shed light on it. It was primarily written documents. So, really, the reason why American history does not go back for thousands of years instead of just hundreds is because the people who were here before the Europeans arrived, with maybe two exceptions, never found a way to record their collective memories in a way that would survive the ravages of time and still be decipherable by people who came later. So we're not going to spend a lot of time with this because there's not a whole lot of history here. There's guesswork. It's Pre-Columbian America is more the province of archaeology than anything else. There are accounts written by Europeans who encountered Native Americans who had not yet been affected, um, that sort of thing. In Central America, there were two different civilizations which had not very efficient, but they had written languages. So here we go. So the European conquest begins with the arrival of Columbus and his men in the year 1492. We'll come back to that in another connection. So, first question, it's not the first question, but I'll throw it down anyway. Were there already people here? Yes, lots of them, and they'd been here quite a long time. Every place in the Western Hemisphere capable of supporting human habitation had people living there. Might make you wonder. They lived on islands. How did they get there? Somebody figured something out. So, um, yes, the every I told you that. um, the population numbers, we'll never know. There's no way to tell that. The guesses are all up and down the spectrum, from as few as 12 or 15 million up to as high as 50 or 60. We just don't know. So the first actual question on your study sheet is, how and when did the first Americans supposedly get here? They got here somehow. Okay, the best guess there, just from looking at a world map, I don't know if you can picture Alaska, where Alaska is, and up about midway up the west coast of Alaska, it almost contacts the far eastern point of Russia, of Siberia. In fact, the water passage known as the Bering Strait, after Vitus Bering, an explorer back a few centuries ago, it's only about 30 miles across there. So the theory is either in the remote past when ocean levels were lower, exposing a land bridge, or perhaps during times of glaciation, there are then and now people capable of surviving on the polar ice cap. People just filtered across a few at a time from Asia and gradually, over a long period of time, populated the Americas. DNA research has told us some stuff in the last 30 years or so we could not have known otherwise, and one of those things is that most, but interestingly, not quite all, modern Native Americans are closely related to modern East Asian populations. It comes close to putting that in the bank. In more recent times, as the DNA research gets more sophisticated, I suppose, it's come to light. It's starting to look more and more like Pacific Islanders from the southwestern Pacific established a foothold on the Pacific coast of South America in very remote times. So that's the how. I'm going to end up having to break this thing up, but here goes. Back in the 1950s and 60s, there was a Norwegian named Thor Heyerdahl. Um, and he kind of made a career of demonstrating alternative ways people could have got here from Europe or Africa. Two main things. He had a lot of financial backing, but he financed the construction of a boat, ship, whatever. It was built with the materials the ancient Egyptians had available and built the way they would have built one, though it was quite a bit bigger. We know what their boats looked like because of artwork on tomb walls such as that. And with a crew aboard and a modern ship following in case they got in trouble, he sailed that thing from Gibraltar, and that's right there where Spain touches North Africa, far western Mediterranean Sea. They sailed that thing to the Caribbean, showing that if they'd, had a mind to, the Egyptians could have come over here. But that's it. The Egyptians really never got into the Mediterranean that much. And there's no influence, no indication that they actually did. Some might say, well, pyramids in Egypt, pyramids in South Central America. Yeah, but the ones in Egypt were huge and they were tombs. The one in Central America were more blocky, step-sided things, and they were altars or tombs. Not tombs, altars or temples. Got it. Okay. He also, and this one hardly needed demonstrating, managed to construct a really large ocean-going canoe of the type that Pacific Islanders still use. It's long, narrow, got an outrigger to keep it from tipping over, got a sail, and sail that from the southwestern Pacific to the Pacific coast of South America. They could have done it. And it's almost hard to say they could not have done it. They found the Hawaiian Islands. Think about that. If you're in Hawaii, do you know how far you are from any other dry place? Found that place. So, yeah. And it's turned out that people on the Pacific coast of South America are using a certain distinctive type of fish hook made from the bones of a certain fish today. And Pacific Islanders are using identically the same thing. Okay. There's more about this stuff in the supplements under other connections. As to when, two things. One, I don't know. And two, I don't think anybody else does either. The estimates go back into the 5 figures of years. For a long time, it was assumed by archaeologists that there was one big migration in the remote past of people who were technologically and probably culturally similar to each other. And this was based on the prevalence, gotta have some water. The prevalence of a certain very distinctive style of flint spearhead. They're referred to as Clovis points because they were discovered near Clovis, New Mexico, about 90 years ago. And they're found all over North America, all over Central America, and all the way down as far as Venezuela and northern South America. So that could either be one bunch of people all making their spearheads the same way, or it might have been some people really good at making spearheads and they just got passed around through trade routes. We don't know. But that was so accepted as the initial arrival of people in this hemisphere that for generations, you're studying to be an archaeologist, you're going to be taught as fact that the people who left Clovis points lying about were the first ones to come. Archaeologists digging into some place where Indians once lived. And by the way, that's always fascinated me. It's like reading a book backward. What you find closer to the surface is the most recent, and the farther down you go, the farther back you're going. Anyway, when they came to the Clovis points level, they said, okay, guys, we're done. Close the dig and leave. Wasn't until the 1980s that somebody went back in and reopened a dig site, found there's really rather a lot below that. There is one curious little thing, which could lead to some controversy. It would seem that if the Clovis points people came from Siberia in far northeastern Russia, wouldn't there be Clovis points in Siberia? It would seem that way, but nobody has found one yet. Somebody did run across one in France, so go figure. That really tears up a narrative. The Clovis points were estimated at being around 11,000 years ago. Now that that's not the barrier anymore, it's gone off the rails. I mean, they're talking about 15,000, 25,000 years, 40,000 years. Based on what? I don't know, just how long it would have taken to do it. But think about that. Let me put it in perspective. The modern country with the longest continuous written record of its history happens to be Egypt. In Egypt, the records go back about 5,000 years, 3000 BC. So please explain to me slowly so I can understand why it would take 5 times that long or 8 times that long to populate the Western Hemisphere. You ever notice that the larger numbers get, the more meaningless they become? I mean, you've got astronomical distances, geologic time, and the federal debt. What's a few trillion here and a few trillion there? So I kind of suspect it's America. You can believe anything you want to. Okay. In what ways were Native American societies diverse? Not too much diversity in terms of real ethnicity. They tend to be related to East Asian populations, but they're diverse enough that when it came time to identify exhumed skulls that had been dug up by archaeologists that could be returned for reburial, there were experts who could tell by the facial features which tribe an Indian had belonged to. So they had that kind of distinctiveness. Mostly, though, it's how they adapted to the environments that they were in. If they're living in a woodland area with good topsoil and plenty of rain, they probably live in villages that wouldn't have surprised the Europeans when they came. The men would hunt, the women would farm, such as that. On the Great Plains, they're going to move about more in search of game animals. They got a rough time of it. If you're living near streams in the Pacific Northwest, so it varies a lot. Down in southern Mexico and further down in South America, when the Spanish arrived in the early 1500s, how's this for diversity? They encountered a civilization about on a level, other than the fact they weren't yet to the Iron Age, about on a level with ancient Near Eastern civilizations. They were ruled over by a late coming tribe called the Aztecs, who referred to themselves as Mexica. Draw a line there. And they had an empire with a population around 7 million, that's thought. They had a capital city called Tenochtitlan, which was a wonder of the world, and which may have been 4 times the size of London in the early 1500s. They had good roads, flourishing agriculture. These are very well-nourished, well-fed, healthy people, although they have no resistance to infectious diseases. They had an impressive city. They had effective central government. They had a calendar that did a better job keeping events like the solstices and the equinoxes lining up where they're supposed to be every year than the one the Europeans were using. They had done all this without the wheel, without domesticated beasts of burden. They didn't have metallurgy. They didn't have an efficient written language. Unfortunately, they also appear to have had a religion that featured human sacrifice on a dazzling scale. For a while, that was assumed to be just a myth the Spanish made up to justify conquering them, but the archaeology confirms it, sad to say. So you range all the way from the southwestern deserts of the United States and northern Mexico, where there are folks about as primitive as any ever known, to civilizations only a few hundred miles south. So you have that diversity. There's a lot more about this stuff in the supplements. Well, I guess one more thing. There's linguistic diversity. There are several different major language groups, but within that, there are over 100 different languages spoken in just what is now continental United States when at the time of the European arrival, near as anybody can figure. So these folks were here. They were well established. The idea that they had their ancestral lands where they'd lived for millennia, probably not so much. They'd been pushing each other around for quite a while. So that's about what I'm going to do with this. You need to follow up by reading the first chapter in the textbook and, of course, chapter 1, Precolumbian America in the supplements, which will back up and amplify what I just told you here. So let's do it for this, and after I record the first 1302 lecture, I'll come back and try to do another one. I'm kind of running behind here. Okay,